All right, let's just jump right in. Our minds are these incredibly complex, sometimes chaotic places. But what if I told you there's a hidden grammar, a single, universal process that connects some of its most mysterious expressions? That's what we're going to do today. We're going to uncover the hidden thread that links psychiatric delusions, surrealist art, and even your own weirdest dreams. So here's the central mystery. What do these three things have in common? I mean, it sounds like the setup to a really strange joke, right? You've got a clinical condition, a masterpiece hanging in a museum, and that bizarre movie your brain cooked up last night. They seem like they're from totally different universes. But trust me, the answer reveals something absolutely fundamental about how all of our minds work. Okay, so to solve this puzzle, we have to start with the basics. We need to look at the actual ingredient of thought itself. Let's talk about the mind's building blocks. And here it is. This is the hero of our story, the memory unit. This is the one concept you really need to get. A memory unit isn't just a fact, like a date or a name. It's a pattern, and it has two crucial parts. You've got the theme, that's the what happened part of the memory, and then you have the emotional resonance, which is all about how it felt. Every single memory you have is built from these things. The easiest way to think about this is to picture them as the Lego bricks of your mind. Seriously, they're modular, you can snap them together to build a coherent story, right? But they can also be broken apart. And, most importantly, they can be reassembled into completely new, sometimes bizarre structures. And it's in those moments of breaking and rebuilding, well, that's where things get really interesting. So let's start with our first scenario. What happens when these mental Legos don't just get rearranged, but they actually fracture, when they break apart? This is where we can start to understand certain psychiatric conditions. And check this out. You can see two sides of the same coin here. With something called the Fregoli delusion, the walls between different memory units just dissolve. They incorrectly fuse together. So the brain looks at a bunch of different people and concludes, nope, that's all the same person, just in disguise. On the flip side, with reduplicative amnesia, one solid memory unit splits apart. This leads to the truly bizarre belief that a familiar place, like your own house, has been secretly duplicated somewhere else. And it can get way more complex. In some conditions, you get multiple fractures happening all at once, just shattering a person's entire sense of reality, who they are, where they are, who other people are. And here's the crucial part. These aren't just fleeting moments of confusion. The brain can get stuck in a loop, running that error over and over again until it hardens, until it becomes this locked-in, unshakable delusion. Okay, so that's what happens when memory units break. But what about when they recombine in creative, totally non-logical ways? Well, this takes us into the incredible worlds of our dreams and modern art. Modern art is basically a window into how memory works. Just think about cubism for a second. When you see a Picasso painting of a face from three different angles all at once, it's not just a cool artistic trick. It is a perfect visual metaphor for how we recall memories. The core memory unit, the theme of face, it's still there, but all the perceptual details around it have been shattered and then reassembled into something totally new. So what holds all these weird, jumbled images together? In a dream or a surrealist painting? Well, it's definitely not rational logic. It's what the source material calls an overarching emotional field. Think about the last really weird dream you had. The story probably made zero sense, right? But the feeling of it, that was probably consistent all the way through. That emotion is the glue. It's what creates coherence out of the chaos. And even inside all that chaos, the mind is always looking for an anchor. And it finds them in recurring motifs. You see this in both dreams and in art. Maybe for you, it's that one childhood house that keeps popping up in your dreams. Or for Salvador Dali, it was his famous melting clocks. These things are really strong, deeply consolidated memory units. They're like the big, heavy Lego bricks that resist breaking, and they become the anchors that all the other little fragments can connect to. So we've seen our memory units fracture in delusions, and we've seen them recombine in dreams and art. Now let's look at the third state, the conscious, guided process of putting those pieces back together in psychotherapy. And this process is actually pretty systematic when you break it down. First, those disconnected memory fragments, they have to be allowed to surface, to come out as feelings or images. Then, the therapist kind of becomes a detective. They listen very carefully for those repeating, rigid motifs, the same kind of anchors we just saw, but in this case, they're the source of the problem. And finally, the real work begins, to rebuild the whole story, to reframe that core motif and weave it back into a new, healthier narrative. And it's not as simple as just spotting any old repeating pattern. A really skilled therapist has to figure out the difference between the true root of the problem, that primary rigid motif, and all the secondary ones the mind has built up around it, as a defense mechanism.
Okay, so we've looked at fracturing in delusions, recombination in dreams and art, and reintegration in therapy. Now, let's pull it all together and see the single beautiful process that's been hiding behind it all. This table, this is where it all clicks. Look at the pattern here. In every single one of these domains, from dreams to art to therapy, there's a different binding mechanism that takes our memory fragments and makes something new. In our dreams, raw motion creates symbols to help us process things. In art, it's artistic intuition that creates work to communicate deep feelings. And in therapy, it's a guided reassembly that creates a new narrative for healing. The outcome and the purpose are different, yes, but the underlying grammar, that process of reassembling our mental Legos, is exactly the same. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that these are not three different things. They are one. Just one single process of the mind, organizing, breaking, and rebuilding itself. It's just expressing itself in different contexts.
And that's really it. The line between a delusion, a dream, and a great work of art is way thinner than any of us thought. They are all, at their core, expressions of how our minds are constantly working with their fundamental building blocks, our memory units, to make sense of the world, to express what we can't say in words, and ultimately, to heal.
This whole idea gives us a powerful new way to think about our own inner lives, right? And it leaves us with one last big question. If all your memories and feelings and ideas are built from these little Lego-like units, what are you building with yours?